The Texas State Board of Education has finally made a ruling. They voted 9-5 for new high school standards in their textbooks. Their textbooks reach 4.8 million students in Texas over the next 10 years, but also are very important to the whole country because since Texas is such a large state, a lot of other states simply take the Texas state books and put them in their classrooms as well. So very broad implications for the country. So they had some debates. I want to tell you about some of the results. First of all, they decided to reject language to modernize the classification of historic periods from BCE and CE to the traditional BC and AD. So is it before Christ or after Christ, or does it not have to do with Christ? I think Ben and I are of the same mind here. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, we lost that one. It's okay.
Yeah, okay. It's BC. Everybody calm down. Even if you're a lib, it's going to be all right. Even if you're an atheist, it's called BC and AD, and let's move on with our lives, okay? There are more important things in the world. All right, now, in my opinion. The another thing that they lost on was one of the Republicans introduced a provision that would, when they referred to President Obama, refer to him in his full name, Barack Hussein Obama.
Well, originally the history course referred to the election of the first black president, and then incredibly disingenuously, a Republican there named David Bradley said, I think we give him the honor and privilege, the full honor and privilege of his full name.
And then even other Republicans stood up and they said, look, dude, don't drag us into that again, okay? Yeah. Just let's...
The intent behind what you're doing, another Republican said, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, we see where you're driving with this.
Yeah.
Right.
So eventually he withdrew that.
He withdrew that. So that did not go into the books, okay? Now, here's some of the things that did. A new requirement that public school students in Texas evaluate efforts by global organizations such as the United Nations to undermine U.S. sovereignty.
Yeah, that's taught by Professor Sean Hannity.
What efforts? I mean, they're putting this in a textbook. What efforts does the U.S. secretly have to undermine our sovereignty and apparently threaten our individual liberty and freedom?
One of the most outspoken conservatives on the board, Republican Don McElroy, who I believe lost in the last recently in the most recent election, but he's still on the board. He argued that he put that amendment up there. He argued that efforts to, quote, put us under world court and to impose the sovereignty of Americas under treaties that have been signed with these United Nations organizations. That's a quote. He's a crazy person. Who talks like that?
And look, I'm surprised they didn't put the black helicopters in the textbook. This is supposed to be a textbook where we learn facts, not your political opinions. They say that they strengthened the requirements on teaching the Judeo-Christian influences of the nation's founding fathers and are watering down the rationale for the separation of church and state. Now, again, it's a history textbook. The separation of church and state is real. Just read the First Amendment, right? Let alone the other parts of the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers, a lot of them were deists and did not have Judeo-Christian heritage, and let alone as a basis for the Constitution.
Again, they're always talking about how the Judeo-Christian nation, and they're always these guys also want to minimize the separation of church and state, and the Founding Fathers put it in there. I don't understand how they reconcile that part.
Well, they do it by pretending otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. That's how they do it. They do it by lying. This is another thing. Another Republican amendment dropped the study of a landmark 1949 federal court ruling that declared schools could not legally segregate Mexican-American students. Remember, this is Texas, so it's relevant. So 1949 federal court ruling says you can't legally segregate Mexican-American students. That's what Texas was doing. It's a pretty good ruling. And even though the practice, it says, remained popular in Texas for decades, the Republican wanted to drop it. Don't mention the case, like it didn't happen. And again, the guy who restored it is the one Republican who was voting with Democrats, the one moderate Republican who has got to be doing this the entire time, rubbing his temples like Ed Harris in Apollo 13.
It keeps going. They want to take away, and they did, referring to the U.S. government as a constitution. They want to refer to it as a constitutional republic rather than a democratic country.
Yeah, they don't want to call it a democracy because it's got those first four letters. It sounds like Democrat.
Ridiculous. They want to question the value of the U.S. dollar, and including the abandonment of the gold standard. In other words, they want the kids to study whether we should go back to the gold standard. Now, I got a lot of problems with the value of the U.S. dollar. One, my opinion should not go into a history textbook. And number two, you want to go back to the gold standard? Come on. I mean, this is all madness. All right. Now, having said that, let's get to the my favorite part of it. So they had the thing where I ignore the thing we did about the Mexican Americans, and then they said,
And just talk about Jeff Davis. Include Jeff Davis.
you're right, and then they agreed to delete a requirement that sociology students, quote, explain how institutional racism is evident in American society. So now, let's not discuss that. It's not, no, there is no racism in society. Why? Because there was never any slavery in society. What?
No, what?
Okay, now, this one lost, but it was proposed by Republicans that they change the name of the slave trade to, quote, the Atlantic Triangular Trade.
The slave trade would be referred to as the Atlantic Triangular Trade.
Huh, they were exchanging triangles, were they?
They were exchanging triangles. What they do is they would go to Africa, and they would pick up these triangles, and they would put them in boats, and they would take the triangles back to Europe and the Americas, and then they would sell them, and they would put the triangles to work.
For no money.
For no money. They wouldn't pay the triangle. Why would you pay a triangle?
Right. Now, if you don't say the word slavery, then it didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay, now look, I know what they're referring to. Of course, there was a triangular trade with rum, etc., and we get it. But that wasn't the main thrust of the trade, wasn't the 3 different places that they ran the goods from.
Hey, look, if you talk about the slave trade, you can talk about the economics of the slave trade.
Of course.
I got it. Yeah.
And you should definitely teach the kids about the triangle where they ran the rum and the slaves, etc.
You can talk about the triangular trading of slaves.
Come on, are you kidding me, man? I mean, look, that goes to show you, 1, how little they care about history, and 2, what a joke they are. That the textbooks, history textbooks, would not mention slavery, but the Atlantic Triangular Trade.
Anyway, that didn't pass.
All right, well, luckily that didn't pass, but all the other goofy things we told you did pass.
Some of them did, and then eventually they had to be restored. Eventually they settled, they did change this to the transatlantic slave trade.
Oh, slavery exists again. Okay, or the fact that it happened in the past exists again because Texas, are they not merciful, have decided that yes, we can mention the word slave.